Yeah, cool.
Okay,
Got it.
well, we've had some technical difficulties. I feel like that's like the norm. It's not even worth mentioning almost because like what video chat does not have that. But thank you so much, Nicole, for being here at Free Agent, an interview series with artists and writers to hear about kind of their career journey and like how they've navigated the various institutional roadblocks that you might face as a creative person. But yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about yourself. This is Nicole Mueller, artist and podcast in the Bay Area. We are both in San Francisco right now. But yeah.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for the invitation. These are like my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm really excited for this conversation. And yeah, I'm Nicole Mueller. I live in San Francisco. Like you said, I'm a visual artist, primarily a painter, and also interested in the world of expanded painting. So I've been taking on some more public projects recently, thinking about how painting as a medium and idea can be translated into different materials. And I really love this idea of painting as sort of personal visual language, and really love color and psychology and how all of these things can kind of come together in the abstract painting, which is what I do, and tend to work very large scale on paintings in the studio as well as installation-based work for various projects.
Is it possible to do a quick pan of your studio, or would that throw
Oh,
off
sure.
the hand?
Yeah, this is exciting. I actually do a lot of recording from home, so this is kind of a new we got the
Oh,
tripod
I
going
see.
here,
Oh,
so
cool.
we got some works in
Ooh, got a new
progress.
pan.
Yeah, you're not supposed to see that actually, but it's okay. We'll do it for the
Okay.
viewers.
Well, this will be a couple weeks down the road, so hopefully by then you'll be ready to share.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, working on some secret projects. Sorry for the trash can. All right, there we go. Real view of the studio.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and so for viewers, I was just there because you were finishing up a giant mosaic project.
Yeah.
That I do want to talk about, and I'll include some images of it or like maybe you can send me some too in the post that I have this
Sure.
part of this. But I wanted to first kind of talk about just in general, like as a visual artist, I feel like from the outside, I've seen you navigate your career, and it feels like you are as successful, if not more, being a artist who sells like from your studio or creating these like larger opportunities for yourself where you're not necessarily trying to like navigate the art market in the traditional way. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear what an outside perception is like from I don't know, I guess like being on the inside of it. It doesn't necessarily feel as if this was some sort of alternative route that I've chosen, but what I would say is that I felt like some of those more traditional rungs of the ladder seemed a little bit less accessible. And something else that has been a primary goal of mine for a really long time is to build a life and career as an artist that is sustainable, and one that where my practice is able to financially support me. And so I think being clear about that being a goal for a really long time has eventually, over the course of a number of years, started to lead into some bigger projects. So it's not as if I'm kind of uninterested in engaging with the more traditional art world or art market. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
certainly interested in working with galleries to build visibility and context for the work, but I
You're
also
available for
uh,
opportunities, in other words.
sure, yeah, for sure. But I think I did have I think an understanding that the sort of markers of art world success, or like reaching a certain level of visibility with your work, didn't necessarily translate into financial stability. And so that was something that I
Yeah.
was really clear that I wanted to prioritize with the work. And I think that's what's led me to pursuing other projects and really thinking about how I can, be able to make the work that I want to make and take on these ambitious projects, but also so that the practice can be self-sustaining.
Yeah, I mean, not to like throw off your momentum, but I really think that's a myth that getting press will equate to financial gain. I don't, or like any kind of like, number of followers, like it doesn't automatically translate like one to one. I don't know if in your experience, like if like for your podcast or anything, you guys have gotten attention that has actually translated to money. But in my personal experience, usually media translates to more opportunities that may get money, but it's not like an immediate, like the sales come like flooding in or.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's something that just kind of organically happens. I think that, whatever you are striving for, whether it is that financial stability or whether it's more visibility or more press or more opportunities, I think that you can get there, but it takes, being really proactive. And I think just being clear about those things, they're not necessarily connected. They certainly can be. Obviously there are really established artists working at a high level who are creating work full time and their work is
Yeah.
highly visible in the art world, so it's not as if those intersections don't exist. But I think for emerging artists it is one of those myths that if I just work hard enough and I just get the right gallery representation or just get enough press or visibility, then like these other problems are just going to dissipate or like the money will follow. And so I think really being clear about what your goals are in the beginning can save you from a lot of heartbreak when you feel like you're hustling and working really hard and it's just not, materializing in the way that you hoped.
Yeah, and I mean, and like on that note, like you really do seem to hustle and find ways to fund your projects. Like one of the first things that you were working on when I met you was this giant mural in the dog patch that was up like temporarily kind of off of Third Street, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I remember you getting it funded and or like that you got all the paints donated by the company. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like hard work is obviously a prerequisite. I think every artist knows the hustle of juggling multiple jobs and
Totally.
working on the weekends and, nights, just trying to squeeze in whatever studio time you can. So I feel like those are in some ways necessary stepping stones to get to whatever those larger goals are. And so in the beginning, sometimes it is taking on projects that will hopefully lead into other things, even if you don't know what they are. And I knew that I wanted to do larger scale work and start translating some of the paintings I was making in the studio into the realm or at the scale of mural painting. And
Mhm.
I didn't necessarily have the work in my portfolio to show for it when I moved out to San Francisco. So initially I was just looking for opportunities that would kind of allow me to build that experience. And I had
Yeah.
found a wall in Dogpatch, the neighborhood that I live, and it was on Nextdoor, that app that was kind of looking for a mural, and the building
Okay.
was slated for demolition. So it was really low stakes. And conveniently in Dogpatch, there is a hardware store, a paint supply store, and at the time, an equipment rental.
Mhm.
So I went around to local businesses and shared the plans or the idea for this mural that I wanted to do, and was able to get all of the paints donated, all of the supplies to paint the mural, and a scissor lift loaned out for like a month.
That's
And obviously
insane.
I was volunteering my time, but yeah, it just really showed me the generosity of the community, and that when you apply a certain level of creativity to your career and opportunities, you can make really big projects happen,
Yeah.
even if you don't have a big budget to start with.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like having like co-hosted the painting salon for a long time and when you apply for grants like the Southern Exposure Alternative Exposure Grant, one of the things you do is like put in what the in-kind donations were, to like help you
Yeah.
budget. And I remember being like totally blown away once I added up all the time and money that people kind of have contributed or like resources that translated to money. And it was like tens of thousands of dollars, if I had been going through like a monetary channel. And so I think that's a really good point, is like, you may not get directly compensated all the time, but then if you think about like what people are giving you in order to like do the thing that you love, and you get to contribute, and you're building your portfolio and everything, I think that's like such a great way of looking at it. And um I don't know, and you got to do something you loved, which is really cool. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and artists are incredibly resourceful. We what we sometimes lack in like financial resources, I think we make up for in social capital and creative
Mm.
capital, and having other skills to share with one another, having resources like space or materials. I mean, there are a lot of things that we can both contribute to the community around us, as well as receive. And so I think just kind of opening up our mind a little bit on what that exchange can look like can, be a way of finding support for things that otherwise may have seemed like they were out of reach.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like the social capital of the artist, it doesn't necessarily pay the rent, but it can go a long way. um,
Yeah.
well, so yeah, then kind of thinking about like, I guess I do want to get to your like your mosaic. So maybe we can just talk briefly about that. Like, again, I'm going to include photos. It's like this beautiful, huge scale mosaic that normally when an artist will do like a large mosaic, like in the airport or something, they'll have the company like fabricate it completely and probably won't be so involved with like the individual tiling, is my understanding. And you kind of took on the project where I'm going to do it all myself kind of energy. So maybe you could just talk about that, and as well as your concept behind the project.
Yeah, this project was such an exciting opportunity for me to really expand into spatial design. And Mosaic was part of a public art project based in Tempe, Arizona, that I'm getting ready to install in about a week.
Oh,
And
awesome.
it's been over a year in the making now. And it's for a public park and recreation center. And so I proposed a series of artworks that would help connect the interior and exterior of the space through a large mosaic that kind of leads you into the building, and then a series of kiln formed glass pieces on the interior through a set of skylights, and then some reception area windows. And so I was really thinking about the entire site as one cohesive artwork. And I think I've always been really inspired by painters that have expanded into spatial design, like Ellsworth Kelly with his Chapel Austin, and Matisse's Chapelle du Rosaire. And I think these artists have been really influential for me in the way that I think about painting as being really expansive and not necessarily limited to works on a canvas. And so for me, the chance to work in new materials like mosaic and glass and think about how my paintings would translate into those materials was really, really exciting. And so this is the most ambitious project that I've taken on. And part of the appeal, I think, with working in a new medium was getting to learn that process. And because my paintings are so process-based, and it's so much about the artist's hand and that kind of like intuitive, physical feeling of like translating, marks onto a canvas, I really didn't want to outsource or hand off that part of the process with this piece. And so with the glassworks, we are working with a local fabricator because that's not something that I have experience in or can fabricate myself. But with the mosaic, it really was a chance to learn a new material. So I knew I wanted to be able to fabricate the piece myself. And I did have the help of a couple of studio assistants here over the summer, but we fabricated the entire piece by hand. It's about a 750 square foot mosaic. So it's fairly large scale, and it's taken the last 6 months or so of kind of dedicated time in the studio to complete. But
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see it installed, and it's the largest permanent public project that I've worked on. So I think it's also been a stepping stone into the world of public art, and kind of being able to use some, past projects to lead into this one.
Yeah, well, and like what struck me being in person is just how much detail goes into the mosaic, because like, you know, you'll have these kind of brush strokes of color that are sections of like certain tile. Like each brush stroke is kind of made up of, you know, maybe one or two types of tile. But then within each kind of section of color, you know, you have different sizes and the shapes have to kind of correspond. And like, if you had a bigger tile that you wanted to be kind of broken, you had to like break it by hand, which just kind of blew my mind, like thinking about how, I don't know, all the effort and the consideration that would go into like even just one, you know, 2 by 2 foot section. So yeah, it was very like kind of viscerally impressive, like seeing it in person. So I'm excited to kind of
Hey.
have it be in the world, because I just was so impressed with that. And then I was wondering if you could show that little glass piece that you showed me. It's like in the corner of your studio that you're going to be using as like a
Oh,
sample for the skylight. Would you be okay with that?
yeah, totally. I'll be
Yeah,
right
I
back.
figure
Sorry
since
for the
we
video.
have video, you know, we can do not to make
Totally.
you run around.
No, I love it. Yeah, so this was a sample for some of the glass pieces on the interior, which we actually didn't end up using, but it's a pretty similar color palette. So
Oh,
this
yeah.
is an example of once you cross over the mosaic inside of the building, there's a few areas of transparent colored kiln-formed glass. So it's essentially like a kind of contemporary form of stained glass. And I knew that we really wanted this area to be about color. And because the light is so dramatic and intense in Arizona, to really allow the natural light to shine through as like a, you know, core part of like a key ingredient to the work. So just kind of activating that with color throughout the space. And as you enter the building and travel down this long, narrow hallway, there's a series of skylights that I wanted to kind of mimic the tones or create some kind of a gradient like the sunsets in Arizona. And so the color palette moves from this kind of teal to marigold over 5 separate windows. So this was a sample that we had made by Meltdown Glass, is the fabricator in Tempe. And the material that we're using is bullseye glass, which is really beautiful and painterly and can be kind of combined and layered in the same way that you would mix colors in a palette. And so
Yeah.
this is one of the pieces that
That's
we
so
made for the
cool.
skylight.
And Bullseye is in the Bay Area as well as New York. Is that right?
Yeah, they're based in Portland, Oregon,
Oh,
actually, and
okay.
they do fabrication themselves for projects, but they also source material for all kinds of other public projects. And they have a resource center here in the Bay Area in Emeryville that's really amazing. And I was able to look at some samples there,
Yeah.
and I think they have a few other locations around the country too.
Okay. What do you think is the biggest thing that you've learned from taking this on yourself?
Oh my gosh, just how collaborative the public art process is. I think even as a studio artist that's kind of like stepped into the world of public art, where I would say that, you know, my work is primarily driven by this kind of like personal visual language and seeing that translated into different mediums or at different scales. You know, I wouldn't necessarily say that my work is inherently connected to like social practice or very like community driven. You know, I tend
Yeah.
to work pretty independently in the studio, but I think just by nature of creating work for a specific environment or for a specific community, the process becomes a lot more collaborative, and also just working with other partners and fabricators. I mean, with this project, it's, you know, the public art managers for the city of Tempe, the main construction team on the project, the architecture studio that designed the building, the landscape architects that are responsible for everything around the building,
Right.
the concrete installers that are installing the mosaic, the glass fabricators. There's just so many different teams involved. And so actually, I think that past experiences I've had outside of the arts, working other day jobs within arts administration and higher education, have been the most valuable in the public art process. So
Mm,
things like communication and project management, time management, I would say all of those skills are just as, if not more important than the ability to just creatively execute a vision in the studio for projects like this.
Oh yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, and then also managing a team to help you produce it, which seem very intimate. You know, you're spending like 8 hours a day with these two people in your studio and like trusting them to produce work with you. And yeah, that's interesting. There's this like emotional intelligence piece to it to know how to like navigate all the like kind of different styles of communication and everything between the vendors and
Yeah, it's been a growing experience in the best way because it has really forced me to step outside of my comfort zone again
yeah.
and again and work closely with other people and hire on studio assistants for the first time and all of these things that I didn't necessarily have experience in, but I think having a project that really like necessitates that can really encourage you to take some risks or just, to challenge yourself in different ways. So I'm really grateful to this project for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. That seems I would be very uncomfortable with all of the like moving pieces and variables. So that's interesting to hear you say that. I wanted to, before we go, talk about your podcast briefly called Beyond the Studio. And
Sure.
I think in a lot of ways it tackles some similar themes that I'm interested in, talking with artists about, which is essentially like how to make a sustainable art career, and does it have to look like what we're told it has to look like, by the art newspaper or something, like who's deciding like what the right art career looks like and how are people navigating it and what does their life outside the studio look like to kind of accommodate the different challenges of the artist. So um I'm curious, like, you guys talk a lot about finances and you're really generous with your own finances, like both you and your co-host Amanda Adams. Um, is there anything that you've learned that you feel like is like the key takeaway from all of you've done like 3 seasons now? Is there anything that you would say is like kind of a main theme or a takeaway from all of your interviews?
Oh my gosh, there are honestly so many things. Let me
Yeah,
think about
that's
what would
not
be
really a fair
some.
question, I realize.
I love it though, because I think like something, and maybe this is kind of a cop out, but I think just how individualized artist careers really are has been
Mm,
illuminating that, every artist's career path does look really different and there are infinite ways to build a life and career. And so I think, while there is no formula to building a career, I think that there is so much to be learned through sharing artist stories and just hearing from their own personal lived experiences. And I think the realization that our struggles and our challenges are not as unique as we might think is really reassuring. And that, there are other artists that have faced these before that have managed to, figure things out. And some of the things that we've been talking about, I guess, just that, the visibility, the financial stability, the like the accolades, like these are all kind of separate uh goals or things that are, that they sometimes intersect, but they don't always necessarily. And so I think
like
the
they're
artists.
nice, but they don't pay the bills, like accolades, even like awards, they don't necessarily create financial stability.
Yeah, and I think just that, your career is a really like fluid and ever evolving thing. Like there's never this sort of stage where, I don't know, you feel like you've just made it. It's like
Yeah.
um not in a discouraging way, but just that like, what I've noticed or I feel like what we know to be true, but has been reinforced through the podcast is that artists are incredibly brilliant and resourceful and resilient. And we have all of these amazing creative skills. And so the artists that we've interviewed that are, making a living full time or that have just managed to sustain a practice for decades, which in and of itself is such a huge achievement, I think are the ones that are really open and curious and proactive about all aspects of their work and life, not just the work that they're making in the studio.
Yeah.
And that there are ebbs and flows. There are artists that I look up to as, seeming really established, or like they've had all these museum shows and done all these huge public projects. And then on interviewing them, come to find out that they, had to take a step back from their art making for 2 years to care for a relative or something. And I think when you're going through those difficult periods yourself, it's easy to feel like your artistic identity is like being shaken. Like, am I even an artist if I'm not constantly producing work? And so I just think like all of these myths like don't really do us any good, and just being a little bit kinder to ourselves, knowing that, whatever it is that we're striving for is possible, and that there is a lot more within our control than outside of it, and that being proactive and being clear about what our goals are, cultivating community. I think we tend to gravitate towards artists that are kind of multifaceted. There's not just one thing, which
Yeah.
I guess is something else, that there's always a diversity of like income streams, or just tend to be like a lot of different like rods in the fire, or different forms of art making, different types of community. So I guess, I don't know, I'm a long-winded answer just to answer your question. I think that there are so many different art worlds, like so many different subsets of the art world, that
Yeah.
the one version that we might have learned or internalized through going to art school is not all that's out there, and that there are so many different ways to make a living and a life in the arts.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I actually did hear that in art school during a artist lecture. It was like, can't remember if it was in Madison, Wisconsin. Like I want to say it was in Madison, even at the very early stages of my art career. And I kind of didn't know enough then to even know what they meant. But I always thought like, oh, what does that mean? Like, is one better than the other? Like I think I would still not totally buying into it, because there's the one art world that like gets you in the art in the textbooks. And at the time I thought like, what's more important than being like footnoted in history, but I think having been outside of school now for a good amount of time, like I don't even know if I care. Like I don't know. Do you talk to anyone who thinks about being in like an art history textbook anymore? It feels like such an outdated concept. Like I think gallerists
Yeah,
worry about that. I don't know.
yeah. I honestly, through the conversations that we've had, this sort of like art world, art market that I think we're talking about is actually can feel and is very separate from most working artists' lived experiences. And
Yeah.
so maybe it's something they think about or engage with, but it is not their world. It's not the art world. And so
Yeah.
I think that is one of those things that is sort of out of your control. I don't think that we can decide for ourselves whether or not we're going to be written out in the history books. I think we can just try and participate in a greater conversation through our work and through our community. But history is being rewritten all the time. Also, there are
I
artists
was
that
gonna
were virtually
say.
unknown decades ago that now are getting visibility for their work. So I think that's one of those things that, you know, maybe, but I don't think it's a day-to-day concern for most artists that we talk to.
Yeah, I mean, and just as you were saying that, I was thinking that there's so many other types of media out there now than like the traditional like art history text, that there's so many other stories being told about artists and by artists that we didn't have maybe growing up. And I guess that's why like that textbook of like the history of art, like really feels like such a like outdated mode of storytelling, I guess. And that's where like Katie Hessel's The History of Art Without Men like comes into play. It's like challenging the canon that were brought up with. But then even
Yeah.
beyond that, like, do we even need just the one history of art? Like, yes, it's helpful to understand where we came from, but like now I don't even know what we would say like about our current like last 20 years. It's just been like a hot mess of people just trying to make work that helps us move forward, consciously, or, um, you know,
Yeah, I think it's so much more expansive and
yeah,
just trying to,
multifaceted too. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, I guess to wrap things up, is there anything that you're working on right now? You're getting back into the studio with your beautiful paintings, but you know,
Yeah. I'm
anything
about
coming up?
to head out to Arizona to install the mosaic for that public project. So I'm really excited to see that finally come to fruition these next few weeks. And I am working on some other painting projects right now. And I'll be jumping into some as soon as I get back in September. So I'm really excited for the fall and just to get back into painting and to kind of get started on some new projects. So I'll have more to share in the next few months.
Yeah, find you on Instagram, I assume. And I don't, are you on TikTok?
Yeah, no, I'm not on TikTok. But you can find me on Instagram.
Cool. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we'll post all the links in the essay on Substack. And yeah, have a good one. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, this has been fun.
Bye.